This is Jim from Portage M&A Advisory, and you're listening to the Selling Successfully podcast, the show that simplifies selling your business for those thinking about moving into the next chapter of life. If you like what you hear, please follow or subscribe to find us easily and listen again. We're here when you need us. Today we're talking about wealth planning and management and how it sets the stage for a successful sale. Joining me is Ed.lee, financial advisor at RBC. He has over 20 years experience in the industry, supporting families, businesses, and working on their wealth planning needs. You touch on capital preservation and tax efficiency strategies. Thanks for joining me, Ed.
Well, first off, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me here and welcoming me into the Portage offices. Truly appreciate it.
No, and this is a topic that is near and dear, as you know, and it is really step one, in my opinion, for ensuring that someone can sell their business, making sure they get all the pieces correct. So let's talk about the big picture to start. We know that running a successful enterprise involves wearing numerous hats. You're managing operations, you're looking at growth opportunities, serving customers, making sure you've got a good team behind you. They have a full plate. However, amidst the daily grind, there is this piece that oftentimes gets overlooked, which is the financial health of the business and the family behind the business. Wondering if you can talk to us about why this big picture is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, I think you hit the nail on the head. Business owners are so busy being successful. Typically, when you speak to a business owner, they're up at 5 a.m., they're in the office at 6:30, they're busy. And what that also would mean, quite often, is that the family as well is drawn into the business. It is a busy household. And as a result, all the focus is often tilted toward running the business versus looking at their investment and wealth management and also planning for retirement. And these are the types of things where someone like myself, in conjunction with many other specialists, will be able to help out on. And really, we're looking at not just the immediacy of the moment, we're looking at planning over the next 5, 10, 15, 30 years, and often multi-generational in nature.
Right. Yeah, and growing up in a family business, I can say I recall many dinners where the conversation topic was about, hey, what's the agenda for tomorrow? Who's doing what? It becomes ingrained in the family. But, unfortunately, in our situation, there wasn't a lot of planning outside of the business. You talk about growing the business, ensuring there's sufficient equity in the business, but oftentimes we weren't looking at it holistically. What happens after the life of the business? How do you get your equity out? And I imagine you see this a fair amount.
Yeah, very much so. And what can often happen is that the individual business owner or the family is really looking out, again, in that longer term time frame. They're not considering it at this point in time. So what can happen is they're waiting for the big check in the future.
Right.
And in a way, if they're not planning for the moment in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, some of the things can get lost along the way. And what an example might be is, say, on the life insurance side of things.
Right.
Like quite often, really, when we look at, wrapping up a business, one of the key tools and even during the operational kind of life of the business, is having insurance in place, whether it's key person insurance, whether it's to maybe fund a buy, sell, whatever it may be. We've got to plan for that. And I suggest as soon as possible, and there are some advisory teams out there that, they look more for the end game, the wrap up of the business when there's several hundred thousand or even more, I guess I would say more often, millions of dollars that are realized. But my belief is that every business owner should start planning and investing when there's a couple 100,000, 500,000. Get started early, get in the good habits, and then ultimately when it is time to value and exit the business along, with your counseling, then they're ready. That the activity is in place. I'll call it the approach that's going to serve that household and legacy best, it's already in place.
Right. Really appreciate some of your comments there, especially getting in early, because we find too, as M&A advisors, I mean, of course we want to wait until they're ready to pull the trigger and sell and go to market. However, the value that we can really create, you know, with the business owner is 5 years out, ensuring that they got all the pieces in place. And I like your approach where, you know, you're building a relationship, you know, before they've accumulated a lot of, you know, let's call it free cash flow, where they can invest, which is fantastic. But let's talk about some big picture planning and a wealth plan. Can you walk us through, you know, for business owners, what this entails, what this looks like?
Sure, absolutely. So first and foremost, if you look at the process, my first meeting for sure is a lot of listening. I get to understand the business owner, their family, their business sector they operate in. Ultimately, if I don't understand the client and the potential investor, the prospective investor, I really am not going to understand what their needs are.
Right.
So first meeting is often just listening and asking a lot of questions. Call it a discovery meeting.
Sure.
Then what will end up happening is we're going to dig in much, much deeper into an actual wealth plan. And the intent of the wealth plan is to really check into what does the debt situation look like? What does the revenue situation look like? What investments exist? What's the objectives? And what are the retirement needs for the household? All of that comes together in a document, and it's RBC, it's called My GPS. And what we walk away with at the end is about a 40-page document to help guide the investor, the prospective investor, and what's the future going to look like. And also coming out of that, we see, are there any tax-related issues that we have to address up front as soon as possible? Again, we work all the way out, as we've discussed in the past,
Right.
to 92 years old. The belief being we don't want anyone outliving what we plan for. So we go out a long way and we plan for
Right.
that.
So in this plan, this detailed GPS
Sure.
tracker or plan, how do you address the retirement component if they're business owners?
Sure, and a great question. And what we look at doing is really, again, just understanding what are their expectations for retirement. Are they going to want to travel a lot? Are they going to want to buy a retirement property, or say a recreational retirement property? Also, what about their children? What's that going to look like? Are they going to need to support the next generation? We also ask questions like, is there some, on the next generation, is there somebody we're need to be a little more concerned about,
Right.
or may need some special considerations, maybe some additional funding and such? All of that comes together, and we're really trying to look out again to 92 years or 93 years, whatever we end up going to and believing is realistic.
Right.
So ultimately, we're asking a lot of questions, and within that plan, we're looking to address all of those questions when possible.
Right.
Okay.
So if someone were to, you know, have a plan built for them, you know, they can essentially plan the exiting of their business if they're a business owner based on, you know, the retirement needs and that sort of thing. We find, as you know, Ed, oftentimes people aren't sure what their retirement needs are.
Yes.
And where we need clarity is to ensure that the proceeds from the business sale are going to fund retirement. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense for them to sell. So I can see this being extremely valuable for business owners.
Yeah, very much so. And with expertise like Portage brings, that valuation is paramount. The exit strategy is paramount. And in concert, we can see if there's some kind of a mismatch.
Right.
Like if somebody has, dreams of retiring in a villa in France and maybe having a vineyard in France, well, guess what? That's not $1 million exit or a $2 million or a $5 million exit. But we can make sure that we bring the two, if you want to say, documents together. The plan, as far as the wealth plan, the My GPS, but also what is the exit truly going to look like?
Right.
And is there a mismatch, or are they in alignment?
So Ed, I'd like to talk about some of these online plans or cookie cutter plans that, you know, we see some folks download from online versus let's call it a more customized plan. Can you speak to the sort of things you're seeing, and then also touch on, how it would compare to the work that you would do with your plan?
Sure, absolutely. And when it comes to coming up with a wealth plan, first off, I think the old cliche, garbage in, garbage out. A lot of time is spent collecting the appropriate information to put into the plan. We look at existing expense statements. We collect all the the debt and liability that the client or the business owner may have. All of it being fed into the plan. We then would take a look at their risk profile, understand, do these people really believe that they are risk tolerant? As we dig a little deeper, maybe they're not as risk tolerant as they think. And so what we try to do is we'll dial back on some of the expectations for growth in the portfolio. And ultimately what we're trying to do is get them to where they want to be with the least amount of risk associated with it. If somebody uses a cookie cutter solution off of, say, the internet, often what those are, it's just more about 5 or 10 questions, which may be risk-based questions, trying to get a sense, if they can tolerate risk.
Yeah.
And they just will plug a number in and say, if you had $1 million, what does that look like in 10 years? Well, they're not necessarily going to think to add in all the liabilities that they're carrying, some of the other maybe existing accounts they have. I've actually had clients where once we do a deeper discussion, a deeper dive, there are accounts that they've forgotten about.
Right.
And sometimes these are maybe old liras, that type of thing that maybe existed from a former employer. So always a deep dive with someone like myself or somebody on the team is what will really ensure we get all the best information together versus the very simple cookie cutter approach.
Right, and I can appreciate that. I would say too, from our perspective, when we're talking about whether or not the seller has a financial plan, oftentimes we're interested in seeing, the retirement needs and the value that they need to accumulate in order to retire. But the other piece we're looking to see is, has the business been accounted for? Oftentimes it hasn't in the plan. Yeah. There's a high level assumption being made, and we've had a few situations where we looked at the value that was assigned and said, you likely can retire sooner than later, given that, you weren't very prudent in getting an accurate valuation done. Have you ever seen that sort of thing, or perhaps how do you navigate that piece?
Sure, and we have seen that type of thing before, and sometimes going by the gut feel method is not always the most accurate, and I would suggest it's rarely the most accurate. And sometimes people will maybe listen a little bit too much as well to whether it's CNBC on the investing side, Bloomberg, BNN, and they'll come up with these preconceived ideas of, I've got to have more to retire, I've got to have more, and actually when you do the plan and you start to look at their pay down of whether it's a facility pay down, whether it's paying back a loan, whether it's an investor with a mortgage, if they're paying these down in very large increments, they're eliminating their debt, all of a sudden that wealth plan begins to look a lot better. And also if they start early and they start saving and early on, we can really start to get things looking a lot better than they may have been fearful of.
Right. And to that point, do you have any examples of folks who have used this GPS and it's really helped guide them?
Sure. No, absolutely. I had a couple come to me, and small business owners, and they had both come from very conservative families, and so they were just always saving every dollar they had. They weren't really enjoying life, and work was their life. They always seemed to have a kind of a stressed out look and aura about them. And anyway, we worked through my GPS, and it provided a great deal of comfort and satisfaction to them that, hey, we're going to make this. This is going to work for us. And maybe we can do that trip. Maybe we can buy that recreational property. And to see somebody walk away with a peace of mind, that is incredibly rewarding to both them and me as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. And in fact, Ed, we did a seminar not too long ago with yourself, and we talked about some of the success strategies of selling your business. And the biggest piece at the end of the day, the most important critical factor, is planning in advance and having a detailed plan, whether it's on the tax side, personal wealth side, investment side. Those are all key pieces, which aligns really nicely with your MyGBS tool.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, and yes, and thanks again for helping out with the presentation recently. And one of the things all those in attendance came away with was the need to start early. And for you and your services to come in and help someone value the business and then exit. Often that is that 2 to 5 year plan, depending. 2 years minimum, I think, is maybe a decent benchmark. But that said, planning the wealth side of things, the financial planning as well, that we have other people within RBC that can help out with. We do a really deep dive to make sure these people are well situated for retirement.
So Ed, similar to myself here at Portage, I mean, we're not a one-person operation. There's a lot of horsepower behind us. As a business owner, there's a lot of elements that go into the MyGBS plan. There's a lot of elements that they're thinking of, whether it's on the investment side, insurance side, commercial banking side, the personal financial planning. Can you tell us a little bit about your role and the folks, on your team and how the process typically unfolds?
Sure, absolutely. And one of the things, we've talked about before is that something like this is like project management. And I will often speak to those who are possibly future clients, or I'll reiterate with existing clients, my role is really project management, and every household and every business owner is a unique project. There's no one person that can do everything for these complicated situations. So what we do is we rely on external partners as well as internal partners. When it comes to the external partners, my view is always, I'm not going to disrupt an existing relationship, because guess what? If the client is happy, or their prospective client is happy, why would I do that?
Sure.
Occasionally, they might ask for, is there someone else that that might, provide a second opinion. But when it comes to external partners, accountants are key, lawyers are key. There's estate lawyers as well. How's the will structured? Does it all make sense? And that's from that discovery, an ongoing discovery that we touched on.
Right.
Now, internally to RBC, we have all kinds of different resources that we draw upon. We can have private bankers also involved. We can have cross-border specialists involved where there's some even more complicated situations. One of the key partners I work with is our commercial account managers. What kind of debt does a business owner carry? What kind of funding do they have required going forward? We have all of these different people we work with in concert, along with the external. Much like yourselves, when you're providing a valuation and an exit, you're dealing with accountants, you're dealing with all kinds of different people, and that's why I like to position it more as project management, because I think business owners, they often appreciate us recognizing that this is complicated stuff. And I'm not sure what your thoughts are.
No, and I can appreciate that, because again, to reference that seminar we did a few months back about selling successfully, again, one of the key success factors is having a strong deal team and ensuring there's good alignment. And I think the key piece too is ensuring that there's communication amongst all the professionals in your deal team, and that collaboration can make a huge difference. And I know in your space in particular, there's a lot of moving pieces and there's complexities. I mean, I think we're talking at 30,000 feet here, but if you think about the tax planning, the family trust that could come into play, some of the legal and estate concerns, it is quite complicated. So the idea that you've got that many tools in your toolbox is probably comforting, right? And you do need a quarterback or a project manager to ensure everything aligns.
Oh, very much so. And as a great example of this is again on the estate planning side of things. With some of our clients that have some of the more complicated situations, we have will and estate planners internally that we can take their existing will, run it by these people, this internal resource, and they can look to see if there's something that's missing. Maybe it's a really well-designed will. Nothing needs to be done. Maybe the powers of attorney all look good. We're able to leverage some of those resources. So that's a distinct example of what we can draw on to uncover if there are issues or if everything is perfect.
Right. Now, Ed, is these sorts of tools available to everyone, to business owners, to high net worth individuals? How does this work?
Yeah, and that's a great question. Typically, some of the more, I'll call it, refined services like the will and estate planner, usually when you start to get into those levels of specialists internally, they do need to have over $1 million of investments with us, or sometimes I can also make the business case where, this is going to be a wonderful long-term relationship.
Right.
These people need help. They're looking to allow me to help them, and they want to partner with our firm. Often I can also make a case to get some of these other specialists involved.
Right.
With someone that maybe is beneath the hurdle that,
Sure.
the soft hurdle, I'll call it internally.
So, Ed, I know we've had some really good discussion about various topics. From your perspective, what are the key takeaways at the end of the day?
Sure. Well, thank you for asking, and I can guarantee you there's about 15 key takeaways I could rhyme off, but there's a couple in particular that come through. And first off, it's start early. Always start early, and that means start early saving, but start early planning, because again, with business owners, they're usually further along the curve from a net worth point of view, but we need to start early. And there was a recent study by H&R Block that actually indicated 52% of Canadians were not comfortable with where they were in their retirement planning and felt that they were actually behind in the retirement planning. And when you look at that statistic, with all the resources and specialists we have out here now, it should be a lot lower than that. So really, the takeaways, get started early and know that you're not alone, I guess,
Right.
but it's not too late to start to move forward and correct that lack of preparedness.
So, Ed, really appreciate you joining us today. Always great chatting with you, and you always have such great insight. I really, really appreciate it. If I think about our conversation today, we got to start early. We got to make sure that we engage the right people, have the right people around us, and early planning will lead to long-term success. But yeah, again, thank you so much. For those of our listeners who would like to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to find you?
There's a number of ways, and thank you for asking. First off, my email is edward.e.lee at rbc.com. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I believe it's a wonderful tool and can really give people a sense of who you are in advance of even a phone call. And ultimately, I suggest the LinkedIn is key, as is the email, but always willing to help people where people need help. I think it's a priority. Get started early, get a wealth plan together, and plan for the future, and that includes the next generation. So thank you again for having me.
Always a pleasure. And for those of you interested, we've created key takeaways that you can download and access via our podcast page. Please remember to like and subscribe and keep this podcast handy, and we'll see you next time.